I see you there, alone in the silence of your room, where the walls seem to close in as the night deepens. The weight on your chest grows heavier with each breath, as if the very air conspires against your lungs. The faces that once surrounded you have faded like shadows at noon, leaving only their echoes in your memory. I know this emptiness that visits you uninvited, how it sits beside you at meals, follows you into sleep, and greets you each morning before the sun. This pain of abandonment has carved hollows in your spirit where joy once dwelled. But listen closely, beloved soul. Within this very emptiness lies the seed of your liberation, and in this solitude, the divine awaits with open arms to fill spaces others have left vacant. I remember the day Shams of Tabriz left me without warning, like a flame extinguished by a sudden wind. The marketplace of Konya continued its noise and motion, but for me, the world had fallen silent. I wandered the streets with eyes that could not see beauty and ears that could not hear music. My students watched as their teacher became a beggar of meaning. I searched every corner, questioned every traveler, hoping for news of my beloved friend who had carried away my heart when he departed. Night after night, I sat in my chamber, the oil lamp casting long shadows that danced like mocking spirits on the wall. I felt God had abandoned me just as surely as Shams had. My prayers became accusations, then pleas, then finally silence. It was in this silence that I first heard what had always been speaking. One night, as the moon hung like a silver bowl in the dark sky, I ceased my desperate reaching and simply sat with my emptiness. I allowed it to be vast, to echo, to have its full voice. And in that moment, something extraordinary revealed itself. Solitude was not the absence of connection, but its purification. The voices of distraction had been so loud that the whisper of God had gone unheard. It was not that the divine had abandoned me. I had been too crowded with noise to notice his constant presence. This is what I learned in the crucible of that loneliness. Abandonment is not punishment, but invitation. When others step away, they create space for a deeper intimacy with the one who never leaves. I began to understand that my dependence on Shams had become a veil. Even love for another soul can become attachment that clouds the greater love. Each morning, I would rise before dawn and sit facing east, where the first light breaks the night's dominion. I practiced a simple ritual that I now offer to you. Place your right hand over your heart and breathe deeply, feeling the warmth of your own touch. Whisper to yourself, I am never alone. God breathes with me, beats with me, waits with me. Do this for 7 breaths, and on the 7th, feel how your hand becomes God's hand, resting on your chest with infinite tenderness. This practice taught me that comfort does not always come from outside. Sometimes it wells up from within, from depths we had forgotten were ours. The greatest illusion of loneliness is that it convinces you that you are separate from the source. But I tell you this truth that contradicts all appearance: separation is impossible. The drop is always in the ocean, whether it recognizes this truth or not. Your aloneness is not absence, but presence distilled to its essence. When friends fall away, when family turns distant, when love seems to abandon you at the door of your need, remember, these are temporary forms, shifting and changing like clouds. The sky behind them remains constant. God has not withdrawn his gaze from you for even a heartbeat. I walked one evening along the river that flows through Konya, watching how the current carried leaves and twigs in its gentle embrace. Some debris caught on rocks, creating small dams, while other pieces surrendered to the water's flow and traveled smoothly onward. I saw in this the nature of our suffering when relationships end or change. If we resist the current of divine will, clinging to what was or what might have been, we create turbulence in our spirits. But when we release our grip and trust the flow, we move with grace through even the narrowest passages of pain. There was a widow in our city who lost not only her husband, but soon after, her only son. People avoided her, uncertain what to say in the face of such compounded grief. She came to me one day, her eyes dry but vacant, like wells that had been emptied. "Where is God in this?" she asked, her voice as hollow as her gaze. I did not offer philosophy or recite verses. Instead, I asked her to join me in visiting the sick in our community. Each day, we would bring water and bread to those confined to their beds. At first, she moved mechanically, performing acts of service without engagement. But slowly, I watched life return to her eyes as hands reached for hers in gratitude, as voices blessed her name. I was alone, she told me months later, until I realized there were others as alone as I was. In serving them, I found companions on the path. In easing their isolation, I ended my own. This is the paradox I offer you. When loneliness wounds you deepest, look for those who carry similar wounds. Extend your hand not to grasp, but to give. Visit someone who is confined by illness or age. Write words of encouragement to one who struggles as you do. Share bread with a stranger. The miracle is this. In the very act of turning attention from your own emptiness toward filling another's, you will find yourself suddenly accompanied, not just by the souls you serve, but by angels who are always drawn to acts of compassion, and by God Himself, who has said, "I am with those whose hearts are broken." Even now, as you listen to these words, feeling perhaps that they speak directly to your particular pain, know that you are not alone in your listening. Thousands hear with you, their hearts resonating with the same longing for connection, the same fear of abandonment, the same hope for healing. We are a caravan moving through the desert of this world together, even when we cannot see the other travelers through the swirling sands. Trust this hidden companionship. Trust even more the guide who walks beside you, visible not to the eye, but to the awakened heart. I leave you with this truth, distilled from my own journey through the wilderness of loss. The empty cup reflects the full moon best. Your solitude makes space for the beloved's approach. Let your aloneness become holy ground, a sanctuary rather than a prison. Order your days with simple rituals that honor your journey inward. Keep faith with small disciplines that remind you of God's constancy. And watch how, gradually, the very solitude that seemed to be your enemy reveals itself as your most faithful teacher, guiding you not away from love, but toward its purest source. The tears that stream down your face in the quiet hours hold wisdom that laughter cannot teach. I have tasted the salt of grief, felt its weight bend my shoulders toward the earth. When Shams disappeared from my life, leaving no trace but memory, I learned how loss can empty even the fullest heart. My poems became lamentations, my prayers questions without answers. For weeks I wandered the streets of Konya like a man possessed, searching faces for one that would never appear. I neglected my duties at the madrasa, forgot to eat, barely remembered to pray. Sleep, when it came, brought dreams of reunion that made waking a fresh wound each morning. My sons worried, my disciples whispered. They saw their teacher transformed into a stranger by the alchemy of grief. I know the particular torment you feel when someone irreplaceable leaves your world. Perhaps it was death that took them, that final separation that allows no letters, no messages, no chance encounters in the marketplace. Or perhaps it was a choice, theirs or yours or both entwined, that created this absence. The room still holds objects they touched. The air still carries echoes of their voice. And your heart, that resilient vessel, feels suddenly fragile, as if made of thinnest glass rather than flesh. You wonder how such emptiness can weigh so much. You wonder if the space they occupied will remain forever vacant, a monument to what is no longer there. I want to ask you a question, and I ask you to be honest with me and yourself. Have you been fighting against your grief, treating it as an enemy to be defeated rather than a teacher to be heard? If this touches something real inside you, if you recognize this struggle, write in the comments, "I am ready to learn from my loss." When you share this, you're not just freeing yourself, you're lighting a candle for someone still walking in darkness. Your courage to speak truth may be exactly what another soul needs to hear today. In the depths of my own mourning, I received a visitation, not from Shams in physical form, but from understanding that arrived like dawn light through an eastern window. What was revealed to me contradicts what the world teaches about loss. Grief is not an obstacle on your path. Grief is the path itself. Each tear creates the river that carries you toward deeper knowing. Each pang of absence points toward a presence that cannot be diminished by circumstance or time. The world tells you to move on quickly, to replace what is lost, to distract yourself from pain. But the soul knows better. The soul understands that some losses must be fully inhabited before they can become doorways. There was an old woman in our quarter who lost 4 sons to war and disease. People avoided speaking of them in her presence, thinking they protected her from pain. One day, as I sat with her sharing simple bread and lentils, I asked about her sons, their names, their laughter, the particular way each one moved through the world. At first, tears prevented her speech, but then stories began to flow, and with them, a light returned to her eyes that had long been absent. "No one lets me speak of them," she told me. "They think silence is kindness, but in silence, my sons die again each day. In stories, they continue to live." From her, I learned that remembrance is not the enemy of healing, but its foundation. This wisdom I now pass to you. Create a small ritual of remembrance for what you have lost. It need not be elaborate. Perhaps light a candle each evening and speak the name of the one who is gone. Perhaps write a single memory on paper, then fold it into your pocket to carry through the day. Perhaps simply touch an object they loved while breathing deeply 3 times. These acts seem small, but they are mighty in their effect. They acknowledge the reality of your love and their significance. They say to the universe, "This matters. This soul matters. This loss matters." And in that acknowledgement lies the beginning of genuine peace. What makes grief holy is not its intensity, but its honesty. The beloved does not ask you to pretend. There is no virtue in false composure. I remember days when I would suddenly stop in the street, overcome by a wave of longing for my friend, so powerful that I could not continue walking. I would find a quiet corner and simply wait, breathing with the pain rather than against it. The merchants and travelers passing by might have thought me strange, a scholar given to peculiar stillness. They could not see how, in those moments, I was doing the most important work of my life, learning to carry absence without being crushed by it, learning to honor love without clinging to its form. The most surprising truth about loss is that it eventually reveals what cannot be lost. As the seasons turned in Kenya, as winter yielded to spring and spring to summer, I began to notice something extraordinary. The essence of what I loved in Shams, his wisdom, his fierce honesty, his capacity to see beyond appearances, had not vanished with his physical form. These qualities had somehow transferred themselves into my own being, like scent moving from one garment to another hung nearby. What we truly love in another becomes part of us through the very act of loving. This is the miraculous alchemy of the heart. Nothing essential is ever truly lost. It changes form, shifts location, transforms from external presence to internal treasure. If these words are touching something deep in you, if you feel this conversation is for your soul, subscribe to this channel. Here I share teachings for those seeking truth, transformation, and the awakening of the heart. Activate the bell so my words continue reaching you, especially in moments when grief clouds your vision and you need to be reminded of the light that never leaves. There is a practice that helped me when sorrow threatened to consume everything else. Each morning, I would write on a small piece of paper 3 specific aspects of existence for which I felt grateful, despite my loss. Some days, these were as simple as the taste of water, the warmth of sun on my face, the sound of children playing in the distance. This practice does not deny grief. It simply prevents grief from becoming the only truth. It reminds the heart that beauty and pain can coexist, that gratitude and mourning can share the same breath. Try this for 40 days. Write your 3 thanksgivings each morning before speaking to anyone. You need not show them to others. They are between you and God alone. In time, I discovered that my greatest poems, the words that would travel across centuries and continents, were born not despite my loss, but because of it. Had Shams remained physically present in my life, perhaps I would have been content with our private conversations. His absence created a void that could only be filled with song. This is what I wish for you. Not that your pain magically disappears, but that it becomes fertile ground from which unexpected blessings grow. The seed broken open yields the harvest. The heart broken open yields wisdom. Let this be your companion thought when grief visits in the night hours. Remember always that God does not stand apart from your suffering, watching with detached compassion. The divine participates in every tear, every moment of longing, every unanswered question. When you feel most alone in your grief, you are most embraced. When your prayers seem to echo in an empty room, they are being gathered like precious stones. There is a hidden order even in the chaos of loss, a mercy disguised as absence, a new beginning concealed within every ending. Faith is not the absence of pain, but the willingness to remain open to purpose and meaning, even when they are not immediately visible. Keep your heart disciplined in this openness. Watch how time and attention gradually reveal what was always waiting to be discovered. The love that sent you the teacher of loss is the same love that will guide you through its lessons. When life breaks apart, when the structures you built collapse like houses of sand before the rising tide, a terrifying freedom emerges. I know this precipice where you stand now, this vertigo of beginning again. In my 48th year, when the patterns of my existence had been shattered by loss and confusion, I too stared into the void of starting over. I had been a respected teacher, certain of my knowledge, comfortable in my position. Then came Shams, who with a single question could dissolve my carefully constructed answers. And when he vanished, I found myself twice broken, first by the confrontation with my ignorance, then by the absence of my guide. The world whispers that starting over is failure. Society measures lives by accumulation of wealth, status, accomplishments, not by courageous surrenders or necessary endings. But I learned in the crucible of my own undoing that sometimes the most sacred journey begins with empty hands. The desert fathers and mothers knew this wisdom. They left positions of comfort and respect to enter barren landscapes where they might encounter truth unadorned. They understood what many forget, that rebirth requires first a kind of death, a releasing of what no longer serves the soul's evolution. There was a merchant in Kenya who lost everything in a fire that consumed his warehouse and all its precious goods. For weeks he sat in ashes, lamenting his fate. People passed him with eyes averted, uncomfortable with such visible despair. One day I sat beside him in silence, offering neither advice nor consolation, simply presence. After a long while he looked at me and asked, "Will God restore what I have lost?" I considered carefully before answering. Perhaps not in the form you expect, but I have observed that when God closes a door, he opens another that leads to a room you could not have imagined. The question is whether you will continue staring at the closed door or turn to discover the new passage. I see in your eyes the same question. You have lost something, perhaps a relationship that defined your days, perhaps work that gave purpose, perhaps health or youth or certainty. You wonder if what comes next can possibly match what came before. This anxiety creates a storm in your chest, makes your thoughts race like frightened horses, robs sleep of its peace. I will tell you what experience has taught me. What comes next will not be a replacement for what was lost. It will be entirely new, with its own texture and color and meaning. Rebirth never produces an exact replica of the previous life. It creates instead the next necessary form for your soul's journey. Consider the metaphor of the caterpillar and butterfly, so common yet so profound. The caterpillar does not simply grow wings while maintaining its original form. Inside the chrysalis, it undergoes complete dissolution. Its body breaks down into a cellular soup from which an entirely different creature emerges. This is nature's wisdom about transformation. True rebirth is not addition or modification, it is metamorphosis. Everything must be surrendered to the process. Nothing of the old form remains unchanged, and yet, and this is the miracle, the essence continues. The butterfly retains the caterpillar's DNA, its core identity, while expressing it through an unimaginably different existence. If these words are touching something deep in you, if you feel this conversation is for your soul, subscribe to this channel. Here, I share teachings for those seeking truth, transformation, and the awakening of the heart. Activate the bell so my words continue reaching you, especially in moments when the path forward seems unclear and you need to be reminded of the light that guides all journeys of renewal. When I found myself standing in the ruins of my former certainties, I discovered a practice that became my anchor. Each morning, before the concerns of the day could claim my attention, I would spend time in conscious silence, not forcing thoughts away, but not following their endless paths either, simply sitting in the awareness of my own breathing, my own heartbeat, the sensations of my body. At first, this silence was uncomfortable. My mind would fill it with worries about the future or regrets about the past. But gradually, I learned to rest in the present moment, where I found neither anxiety nor sorrow, only the simple miracle of existing. This practice, which I offer now to you, requires no special knowledge or skill. Find a quiet place. Sit with spine straight but not rigid. Place hands palms up on your thighs. Close your eyes. Feel your breath moving in and out. When thoughts arise, notice them without judgment and return attention to the breath. Do this for just 5 minutes each day, then gradually extend the time. In this silence, the voice of your authentic self will begin to emerge from beneath the noise of fear and expectation. The great paradox of beginning again is that the first step must often be stillness. The world urges action, immediate replacement of what is lost, fill the empty space, find new love, start new work. But wisdom counsels patience. After a forest fire, the land must lie fallow for a season before new growth can properly emerge. The soil requires time to incorporate the ashes of what was destroyed. So too with the heart after significant ending. Allow yourself this fallow time. Do not rush to fill every empty hour, every vacant role. Within the apparent emptiness, invisible seeds are gathering strength. Trust this process as you would trust the turning of seasons. I recall a musician in our city whose hands were crushed in an accident. For him, it seemed all was lost. His identity, his livelihood, his joy. All were bound up in the playing of his instrument. For months he lived in darkness of spirit, refusing comfort. Then one day he heard a child singing in the street, a simple melody that moved him to tears. He began, haltingly at first, to sing himself. Time. His voice became his instrument. People who had admired his playing now traveled great distances to hear him sing. What appeared to be an ending had become, through surrender and persistence, a new beginning that brought him to even greater depths of musical expression. This is the way of rebirth, not replication of the past, but discovery of new dimensions in yourself that would have remained dormant had necessity not awakened them. This truth runs counter to our instinct for security. Your greatest gifts may be those not yet expressed, waiting for the precise conditions that will call them forth. The seed of the mighty oak contains the potential for roots, trunk, branches, leaves, and countless future seeds. But unless it falls to the ground and its outer shell breaks open, none of this potential finds expression. In the same way, you contain multitudes, capacities, insights, forms of creativity and service that you cannot yet imagine. Sometimes it takes the breaking open of an established life to release these new possibilities. God's presence in this process of rebirth is not as director, but as companion. The divine does not orchestrate your losses in order to teach harsh lessons. Rather, when life brings inevitable change and ending, God walks beside you through the dismantling, holding space for your grief and confusion, then gently illuminating the path of renewal when you are ready to see it. Remember always that the same force that sustains the stars in their courses beats in your heart. The same intelligence that orchestrates the seasons guides your becoming. You are never abandoned in your endings, never without support in your beginnings. There is a special kind of order that emerges from surrender to the process of transformation. It is not the rigid arrangement of external circumstances according to your preferences. It is the organic harmony of a life aligned with its deepest purpose. When you release your grip on how things should be and open to how they are unfolding, you discover currents of meaning running through even the most difficult transitions. This does not mean passive acceptance of whatever happens. It means active participation in your own becoming, saying yes to the invitation embedded in change, bringing conscious attention to the rebirth that wants to occur through you. As I close these reflections on beginning again, I offer you this original insight born of my own journey through endings and renewals. The empty cup is not merely waiting, it is already participating in its filling. Your openness after loss is not merely an absence to be remedied, it is the first expression of what comes next. Practice this openness with the disciplined heart of a lover awaiting the beloved. Keep simple order in your days. Rise with intention, attend to necessary tasks with presence, rest with gratitude. Speak truth to yourself and others, and watch how gradually, subtly, like dawn light changing the color of the sky, new life begins to emerge from within the very space created by your loss. The dawn arrives whether you are watching or not. This was the simple truth that began my recovery from the great shattering of my life. When my world had collapsed into fragments, when my heart was a vessel cracked in 100 places, I noticed with surprise that the sun still rose each morning, painting the sky with colors no human hand could match. The birds still announced the new day with their chorus, indifferent to my suffering. At first, this continuation of natural order felt like an insult to my pain. How dare the world proceed as if nothing had happened? Did it not know that everything had changed? But gradually, I recognized in this steadfastness a profound teaching. There is a rhythm to existence that transcends our personal tribulations. To align ourselves with this rhythm is to find the beginning of peace. I know the chaos that fills your days now. Your thoughts scatter like startled birds at the slightest disturbance. You begin tasks only to abandon them halfway, distracted by worries about what might happen or regrets about what has already occurred. You reach for your phone without conscious intention, scrolling through images and messages that leave you feeling more hollow than before. You make promises to yourself about tomorrow that dissolve by nightfall. The space where you dwell reflects this inner turbulence. Objects without homes, surfaces cluttered with the residue of interrupted intentions. Even your breath has forgotten its natural cadence, becoming shallow and quick, a mirror of your racing mind. In this disorder, God seems distant, a concept rather than a presence. Yet I tell you this truth learned in my own wilderness. Order is not the result of peace, but its prerequisite. This contradicts the common belief that once our circumstances improve, once our hearts heal, then we will establish the rhythms that sustain spiritual life. The opposite is true. It is through creating external order that internal harmony becomes possible. When my grief was at its peak, my dear friend Hussein noticed how I had neglected my appearance, how scrolls and books lay scattered across my floor, how dust gathered on the prayer rug I no longer used. One morning, he arrived at my door with a broom, a basin of water, and fresh clothing. Today, he said simply, we begin with what we can touch. That day, we swept my small room until the floor was clean. We organized my writings, placing them in neat stacks. We washed the windows until light poured unfiltered into the space. We cleaned my body and dressed it with dignity. These actions seemed trivial against the magnitude of my loss. What did a swept floor matter when my very soul felt unraveled? But as my hands performed these simple acts of ordering, I noticed something remarkable. For brief moments, my mind quieted. For short intervals, I inhabited the present rather than the painful past or the anxious future. My breath deepened. My shoulders relaxed. Though my circumstances remained unchanged, my relationship to them had shifted, if only by degrees. From this experience emerged a practice I maintained even as healing slowly progressed. Each morning, before engaging with the world's demands, I would bring order to my immediate environment. This was not elaborate housekeeping, but symbolic action, making my sleeping mat, washing my face and hands with intention, arranging my writing materials for the day's work, sweeping the threshold of my door. Through these small gestures, I declared to the universe, despite what has been lost, I choose to participate in the creation of order. Despite the chaos of my feelings, I align myself with harmony. This practice gradually extended from my physical space to my use of time, establishing rhythms for prayer, work, meals, rest, and conversation that created a vessel strong enough to hold both joy and sorrow. I offer you now this same practice as medicine for the soul. Begin each day by creating order in one small space. Choose a corner of your room, a table, a shelf. Remove what does not belong there. Clean surfaces until they shine. Arrange what remains with care and intention. As you work, breathe consciously, letting your movements become a form of meditation. This may seem far removed from spiritual practice as you understand it, but I assure you, the divine resonates more clearly in ordered space. This is not about perfection or rigid control, but about creating conditions in which presence becomes possible. Through this simple discipline, repeated daily, you build a foundation for deeper awakening. There was a dervish in our community who had lost his entire family to illness in a single season. For months afterward, he wandered like a ghost, his grief a wall between himself and the world. No words of comfort reached him. No spiritual teaching penetrated his sorrow. Then, one day, the sheikh assigned him the task of tending the garden that provided vegetables for our meals. At first, he performed this work mechanically, without investment. But as days passed, the requirements of the plants themselves, their need for regular watering, for weeding, for support as they grew, imposed a rhythm on his days. He began to rise with the sun to avoid the midday heat. He noticed which plants thrived in which locations. He developed calluses on his hands from working the soil. And slowly, through this physical discipline, his spirit began to reawaken. The plants, he told me later, did not care about my grief. They simply asked for what they needed. In meeting their demands, I found my way back to life. This is the paradox at the heart of spiritual recovery. Freedom emerges from discipline. When life has stripped you of external structures, a relationship, a role, a belief system, you must create new ones, not as prison walls, but as trellises that support growth in chosen directions. The heart, accustomed to wildness, resists such structures. It confuses discipline with punishment, order with oppression. But true discipline is not the enemy of spontaneity. It is its foundation. The musician must master scales before improvising melodies. The poet must understand meter before breaking its rules for effect. The soul must establish rhythms of attention before experiencing the boundless freedom of mystical union. God dwells in the consistency of your return. This truth contradicted everything I had believed about divine connection. I had thought that authentic spiritual experience must always be spontaneous, emotional, dramatic. But through the ordered rhythms of days and seasons, I discovered that the Beloved reveals himself most reliably, not in ecstatic moments, but in faithful presence. When you sit at the same time each day to listen for the divine voice, when you create space for silence amid noise, when you bring conscious attention to ordinary tasks, you weave a net that catches glimpses of eternity and time. The miracle is not that God occasionally breaks through the veil. The miracle is that the veil itself becomes transparent through practiced attention. I leave you with this wisdom distilled from my journey through disorder and return. The faithful hand that sweeps the floor prepares a path for angels. Let your daily disciplines become acts of devotion rather than burdens. Let order become a practice of love rather than control. And watch how, through the simplest gestures repeated with attention, your fragmented self gradually gathers into wholeness. Your scattered attention becomes a focused beam, and the God who seemed distant reveals himself as having been present all along, waiting only for your return to the sacred ordinary of this moment, this breath, this one small task performed with the full dignity of your being. You have been asking for a sign, have you not? Some unmistakable message from beyond that would confirm you are not forgotten, that your struggles have meaning, that the path ahead, though hidden in mist, leads somewhere worth going. I understand this longing. When I wandered the streets of Konya after Shams disappeared, I too begged the sky for signs, demanded that God make his presence known through undeniable wonders. I wanted burning bushes, parting seas, voices from whirlwinds. I wanted proof that would silence doubt forever. This desire for dramatic confirmation is as old as faith itself. We are creatures who crave certainty in an existence defined by mystery. But I must tell you what I learned through bitter disappointment that became sweet wisdom. The signs are already everywhere, but our eyes are trained to miss them. We search for the extraordinary while overlooking the miracle of ordinary existence. During my darkest period, I remember sitting beside the river one evening, my heart heavy with unanswered prayers. A small fishing boat passed, lantern hanging from its buoy, flame steady despite the water's movement. In that moment, something shifted in my perception. I saw suddenly how that simple light, human-made, flickering, yet persistent, moved through darkness without dispelling it entirely, creating just enough illumination for the next stretch of river. And I understood. This is how guidance comes. Not as blinding revelation that makes all paths clear at once, but as modest light sufficient for the step before us. This insight contradicts our natural impatience. Revelation comes not to those who demand it, but to those who develop eyes to see what is already being offered. The universe speaks constantly through the language of symbol, pattern, synchronicity, whispers rather than shouts, gestures rather than demonstrations. The divine hand writes its messages not only in scripture, but in the movement of clouds, the arrival of certain birds, the chance encounter that changes your direction, the dream that lingers into waking, the intuition that arrives without explanation. These signs require from us a different kind of attention than we usually employ. Softer, more peripheral, more receptive to what emerges at the edges of awareness. In the months after my great loss, I began a practice that transformed my relationship with divine guidance. Each evening before sleep, I would review the day just lived, not with judgment, but with curious attention, asking, what unexpected beauty appeared? What seeming coincidence occurred? What words reached me at precisely the moment needed? What small kindness was offered? Through this practice, I trained my attention to recognize patterns that had always been present but unnoticed. This simple reflection, which I now offer to you, requires only 10 minutes of quiet attention as day turns to night. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and let your mind travel back through the hours since waking. Notice what arises naturally in this review. Write nothing, analyze nothing. Simply observe with gratitude what has been given. Over time, this practice will develop in you a heightened sensitivity to the ways God already communicates through your particular life. There was a young student in our madrasa who struggled with faith despite sincere effort. One day, he came to me in desperation. I have prayed for certainty, he said, but heaven remains silent. How can I believe when God sends no sign? Instead of theological argument, I asked him to accompany me to the marketplace. We walked among the stalls selling spices, cloth, pottery, and produce. Look carefully, I told him. Tell me one beautiful thing you see. Reluctantly, he pointed to a display of pomegranates, their red skins gleaming in the sun. Good, I said. Now find another. He noticed a child laughing as pigeons descended for crumbs. And another, I prompted, a craftsman's hands shaping clay on a wheel. And another. An old couple supporting each other as they walked. By the time we returned to the madrasa, he had identified dozens of moments of ordinary grace. These are your signs, I told him, not given once but continuously. The question is not whether God speaks, but whether we have learned to listen. This truth extends beyond moments of beauty to include the full spectrum of experience, even difficulty, even pain. One morning, I was traveling to a neighboring village when my horse stumbled, throwing me to the ground. My ankle twisted, making further riding impossible. Forced to return home, I felt frustrated by this unwelcome obstacle. Only later did I learn that bandits had attacked several travelers on that road later the same day. What had seemed an annoying impediment revealed itself as protection. I share this not to suggest that every misfortune conceals blessing, some sufferings offer no apparent gift, but to illuminate how our immediate judgment of events as good or bad often reflects limited vision. What appears as obstacle may be redirection. What feels like delay may be necessary preparation. What seems like loss may be making space for something not yet imagined. The most reliable sign of divine presence is not external marvel, but internal transformation. When I finally emerged from the cave of my grief, I noticed changes in myself that no deliberate effort could have produced. Where once I had prized intellectual knowledge, I now valued direct experience. Where I had sought respect, I now preferred authentic connection. Where I had clung to certainty, I now welcomed mystery. These shifts occurred not through strategic self-improvement, but through surrender to the alchemical process of suffering honestly endured. The miracle was not that circumstances changed to match my desires, but that desires themselves were refined, bringing them into closer alignment with what truly nourishes the soul. Watch for this sign in your own life. Moments when you realize that what you once desperately wanted no longer holds the same appeal, when priorities rearrange themselves without conscious effort, when you find yourself naturally drawn toward what feels more real, more essential. Beyond personal transformation lies a deeper confirmation of divine presence, the gradual awakening to interdependence. As my spiritual sight cleared, I began to perceive how intricately each life connects with all others, how actions ripple outward in patterns too complex for the mind to track, but not too vast for the heart to sense. I noticed synchronicities that could not be explained by chance alone. How the person I most needed to meet would appear without arrangement, how the book containing exact wisdom for my situation would fall from a shelf, how resources arrived precisely when necessity peaked, but not before lessons of trust could be absorbed. These experiences suggested not a mechanical universe of random collision, but an intelligent field of meaning in which each soul's journey interweaves with every other in an ongoing, unfolding story authored by something greater than individual will. God's presence manifests most clearly not through supernatural intervention, but through natural order infused with meaning. The same sun that warms your skin sustains all life on earth. The same breath that fills your lungs connects you to every breathing creature. The same consciousness that allows you to register these words as significant rather than random marks is a localized expression of universal awareness. When you truly perceive these connections, not as intellectual concept but as lived reality, the sign you have been seeking reveals itself, not as external confirmation of your special status, but as recognition of participation in a cosmos already sacred in its essence. You have never needed proof of divine presence because separation was the illusion. What eyes could see their own seeing? What fish could discover water when it has never known anything else? I leave you with this insight that emerged from my own desperate search for signs. The miracle is not that light occasionally breaks through darkness. The miracle is that your eyes were made for seeing it. Practice looking with these miracle eyes. Train your attention to notice what is already being offered. Keep a discipline of gratitude for small moments of grace, and trust that the guidance you seek has never stopped arriving. It simply speaks a subtle language that the heart must learn to translate through patient listening. The signs surround you even now as you hear these words. They shine from the eyes of those you love, whisper in synchronicities you dismiss as coincidence, and pulse in the steady rhythm of your own faithful heart, beating its drum of belonging to a mystery larger than understanding, but not beyond experience. Peace is not the absence of disturbance, but the presence of something greater. I did not understand this until I had traveled through territories of profound disruption. For years, I had imagined peace as a state where difficulties would finally cease, where questions would find their answers, where the heart would no longer be pulled by conflicting desires. I sought this peace through knowledge, accumulating ideas like a merchant hoards precious goods. I sought it through spiritual practice, believing that perfect discipline would yield perfect tranquility. I sought it through social position, thinking that if others respected me enough, inner doubt would finally be silenced. But true peace remained elusive, always seeming to wait just beyond the next achievement, the next insight, the next stage of life. Then came the storm that destroyed my carefully constructed harbor. When Shams disappeared, taking with him my certainty and composure, I was forced into open waters without the protections I had relied upon. During those turbulent months, peace seemed not merely distant, but impossible, a cruel illusion that had never been more than wishful thinking. I remember one night, unable to sleep, walking the streets of Konya until I reached the edge of the city. There, under stars so numerous they humbled human concerns by their mere existence, I finally surrendered my demand that life conform to my expectations. I stopped insisting that peace arrive on my terms, and in that moment of complete relinquishment, I felt something unexpected, not the absence of turmoil, for my grief remained, but the arrival of something vast enough to hold that grief without being defined by it. This is the paradoxical truth I now offer you. Peace is not what we imagine it to be. It is not the resolution of all questions, but the capacity to live gracefully among them. It is not the elimination of difficulty, but the discovery of a self that is larger than any circumstance. It is not escape from the world's chaos, but intimate participation in its unfolding with trust rather than resistance. This understanding contradicts our instinctive equation of peace with comfort or ease. The most profound peace I have known has often arrived in moments of great challenge, when presence intensifies and the usual distractions fall away, revealing what matters most. I learned this wisdom from an old dervish in our community who had lived through war, poverty, and the death of everyone he had once loved. His eyes held both sorrow and inexplicable joy. "How do you maintain peace with such a history?" I asked him. He smiled and took my hand, placing it over his heart. "Feel this," he said. I felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For years I fought against the current of life, exhausting myself trying to control what cannot be controlled. One day I simply stopped fighting. I surrendered to the river. Now, no matter what storms rage on the surface, in the depths there is a current that carries me. This current has never abandoned me, though I often abandoned it. Some call this current God, some call it nature, some call it the way. The name matters less than the recognition. His words resonated with my own emerging understanding. Peace was not something to achieve, but something to allow, a natural state that appears when we cease our restless attempts to secure happiness through conditions that must inevitably change. I began to notice how often I created my own disturbance through judgment, expectation, comparison, and unnecessary complication. My mind had been trained to find problems requiring solutions, lacks requiring fulfillment, threats requiring defense. This hypervigilance, useful in genuine emergencies, had become habitual, generating suffering where none was necessary. I realized that much of my spiritual seeking had actually been a sophisticated form of anxiety, driven by the belief that I was somehow separate from the divine unity I claimed to pursue. If this message resonated in your soul, subscribe and be part of this awakening journey. Each week I bring wisdom for those who chose the path of true transformation. And leave in the comments, "Today I choose sacred peace." This simple declaration marks the beginning of your journey back home, back to yourself. From this recognition emerged a practice that has sustained me through every subsequent challenge. When I notice peace has been disturbed by fear, anger, desire, or confusion, I pause before reacting. I place one hand on my heart and one on my abdomen. I breathe slowly, feeling the expansion and contraction of my body. With each inhalation, I silently acknowledge what I'm experiencing. I feel fear arising. I feel impatience arising. I feel craving arising. With each exhalation, I create space around the feeling without trying to change or judge it. I simply observe its qualities, its texture, intensity, location in the body, with curious attention. I do not identify with the disturbance or reject it, but relate to it as a weather pattern moving through the open sky of awareness. This practice, which takes no more than 5 conscious breaths, has the power to transform your relationship with emotional states that seem to threaten peace. Remember that peace exists simultaneously with difficulty. This truth came alive for me one spring when Konya experienced devastating floods. Many lost homes and livelihoods, I joined others in providing aid, distributing food, helping rebuild, offering shelter. The days were chaotic, filled with urgent needs and limited resources. One evening, exhausted from the work, I sat beside a family who had lost everything, yet had insisted on sharing their meager meal with those who helped them. As we ate simple bread and lentils, a child began to sing. Soon others joined, voices rising in harmony despite circumstances that might have justified only lamentation. In that moment, I witnessed peace that did not deny reality but transcended it, not by escaping present conditions, but by finding within them capacities for connection, generosity, and even joy that no external circumstance could erase. The greatest barrier to peace is not external chaos but internal fragmentation. When different aspects of yourself are at war, the part that seeks truth versus the part that prefers comfort, the part that longs for connection versus the part that fears vulnerability, the part that knows what nourishes versus the part that craves what depletes, no outer circumstance can bring lasting harmony. I experienced this division acutely after losing Shams. One part of me wanted to maintain my respected position as teacher and scholar. Another wanted to abandon convention entirely and follow the path of ecstatic poetry and music that was emerging through my grief. For months I tried to reconcile these seemingly contradictory impulses through intellectual analysis, creating elaborate justifications for one choice or the other. Peace arrived only when I stopped trying to resolve the contradiction logically and instead listened for the deeper voice beneath both impulses, the voice of a soul large enough to encompass apparent opposites without fragmentation. God dwells in wholeness, not perfection. This distinction has been essential to my understanding of peace. For years I confused the two, believing that inner harmony required achieving some ideal spiritual state free from flaws and contradictions. But divine presence reveals itself most clearly not in polished perfection, but in the courageous integration of all we are. Light and shadow, strength and weakness, wisdom and foolishness. When you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable aspects, when you embrace the full range of your humanity as the very vehicle of your spirituality, peace arrives as natural expression rather than ambitious achievement. This does not mean indulging every impulse or abandoning discernment. It means bringing compassionate awareness to all that arises in your experience, recognizing it all as part of the journey home. There is a discipline that creates space for peace to emerge naturally, the practice of simplicity. Our minds generate complexity far beyond what life itself requires. We spin elaborate narratives about past and future, construct identities from shifting desires and opinions, pursue contradictory goals simultaneously. This mental proliferation, while creative, often obscures the direct experience of being that is peace itself. In my own life, I have found that regularly returning to simplicity in thought, speech, action, and possession creates the conditions where peace naturally arises. This does not mean living as an ascetic unless that path calls to you. It means asking with each choice, does this add clarity or confusion? Does this create space or clutter? Does this serve what matters most or distract from it? Through these questions, applied with gentle persistence, life gradually aligns with its essential nature. As our journey together draws to a close, I leave you with this truth distilled from my own passage through turmoil to tranquility. Peace is not the absence of waves on the surface, but the discovery of depth beneath them. Let your practice be this remembrance of depth, this recognition of the vast ocean that holds every circumstance without resistance. Let your discipline be return, coming back again and again to the present moment where peace is always available, regardless of conditions. Let your prayer be openness to what already is, rather than demand for what you think should be. And watch how, through this receptivity, the peace that seems so elusive when pursued directly reveals itself as the very nature of the awareness within which all experience arises, changes, and dissolves in the eternal dance of becoming.